everyone. Today we're going to talk about some of the more advanced features of Tableau. The first thing we're going to talk about is how to instruct Tableau to read data from multiple files or sheets. Here, we have an Excel sheet that has data on employee burnout. This data gives each employee a burnout score that ranges from 1 to 7. And what I imagine happened here was that employees were surveyed about their burnout. They answered several items, and what we're given here is actually an aggregate score showing their average burnout result. We also have an employee number assigned to each employee, and if you scroll down, you'll see that some of the numbers actually skip. So there's not a continuous range of numbers here. We also have information on employee sex and age. On a separate tab, again, we see employee number, sex, and age, but here we have a score for supervisor humor. Again, these scores range from 1 to 7, and my guess would be that this is the average score from a survey that contained lots of items assessing supervisor humor. Now imagine that we wanted to analyze both sheets of data simultaneously and create a visualization. To do this in Excel, we would have to manually match by employee number every entry's supervisor humor score by employee burnout. And depending on how many missing employee numbers you have across sheets, that can be really time consuming. In Tableau, it's much faster. Once you connect to your data, you see that Tableau identifies both sheets' data. And to work with them both simultaneously, you simply have to drag them one at a time into the workspace. Now, Tableau is going to ask you by default, what do these sheets have in common? What is the variable that tells me that everything about this row of information on sheet 1 applies to this row of information on sheet 2? Well, that data, that thing that is unique, that identifies common rows of information, is employee number. Once I set that equal on both sheets, then Tableau automatically allows me to work with data from both sheets simultaneously. Now, if I drag employee burnout and supervisor humor into my workspace, rows and columns, something strange does happen. Because these are two continuous variables, Tableau defaults to creating a scatter plot, which you might remember from our statistics review early on. But we know this is wrong. We have lots of data points, and all of our data ranges from 1 to 7, not 650 and not 1100. Why is this happening? Well, Tableau is trying to be too helpful. Tableau is actually aggregating that data for you. It's assuming that the entire column of data on both sheets should be treated in aggregate. To fix this, we tell Tableau, don't treat this data like a single measure. Treat every individual data point like a dimension. Once we do that, we see all of our data. Just as when we were working with data from one sheet, we can break this down into matrices by categorical variables. We can use the marks card, and we can change our visualization type. Now let's talk about a new tool. Before we begin the new tool, I'm going to give this sheet a quick title. And now let's turn our attention to these buttons down here. This tiny graph with a plus sign allows you to build new sheets. If you'll recall from earlier in the semester, we said that every time you have a continuous variable, it's always good to look at the histogram to make sure your data is normally distributed. So let's do that. Let's create a histogram for employee burnout. And we see that our data is not normally distributed. In fact, it's extremely right skewed. That's kind of a good thing here because it means that employees have pretty low burnout at this organization. But it does mean that if we were going to run advanced statistical analyses, we'd have to be careful about the analyses we chose having non-normally distributed data. Let's give this a title that is Burnout Histogram. And let's make it a color that we didn't have on the other sheet. Now let's do another histogram. Let's look at supervisor humor. Here, the supervisor humor data is pretty normally distributed. Let's make it a different color. Once again, not represented on the other sheet, and a title. Now, to really understand how all of these data points work together, I want to look at our 3 infographics at the same time. To do that, I'm going to create what is called a dashboard. To create a dashboard, you click on this window pane plus sign box, new dashboard. Now, all 3 of our sheets are represented in this dashboard. And to pull them into the same workspace, I just have to drag and drop. And see how this gray bar appears? That gray bar tells me when I release my mouse where that box is going to end up. I have lots of options. But here's probably where I would let it land. Now I can look at my data simultaneously, and I can begin to tell a story. And the story tells me that one of the reasons I'm probably not seeing a strong relationship here is that burnout is pretty low. Even though supervisor humor is normally distributed, there are things contributing to this burnout that probably is not encapsulated in supervisor humor. Maybe a little bit, but probably not a lot. I can tell that this trend is similar for individuals who identified as male and individuals who identified as female, and that there's not enough information to even see a trend for individuals who identified with third gender or chose not to disclose their gender. Now, I don't like that it just called this null. Null means missing, and null in this case probably is an artifact of that original data set not having enough descriptors for gender identification. If I want to update this descriptor, I need to go back to sheet 1, right-click on the axis, go to Edit Alias, and then change the subheader to third gender or prefer not to disclose. And now I see that anything that I updated in that original sheet immediately updates in this dashboard. Dashboards are an incredibly important part of data storytelling. Sometimes everything that you need to tell can be captured in a single graphic, but often that's not the case. This week, we're going to begin developing dashboards. Just as with any individual data visualization, once you're done with your dashboard, you go to File, Save As, and save as a workbook X file so that anybody who receives your file can see what you've created. Let me know if you have any questions.